Welcome to Mortgage Momentum. Smart guidance, real stories, better home decisions. We are your hosts. I'm Jarod Temple.
And I'm Danielle Hugunin. Thanks for joining us today. This is your go-to space for strategy, stories, and staying sharp in an ever-shifting market.
Let's jump in and get the momentum rolling. Everyone says we need more housing inventory in Kansas City, but what's really stopping us from building them? We're sitting down this week with Will Ruter, Executive Vice President of the Kansas City Home Builders Association, and we're going to talk about red tape, affordability, and his mission, let them build.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Danielle. I'm with Bell Bank Mortgage. This is my partner in crime,
Jarod Temple.
And today, like Jarod just said, we are joined by the one and only Will Ruter. Will, how are you today?
I'm fantastic, and I'm very, very happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. Today, we kind of wanted to talk about why it's so hard to build, what is driving housing costs, and how the Let Them Build initiative that you're spearheading is helping all of this. So
it really sounds like a passion project, and I love that you talk about localism a lot and that you genuinely really believe in being a driving force of change in our community. It's extremely refreshing, and we're really, really lucky to have you here, and would just love to hear more about this initiative and your thoughts and all of these challenges and how all of us as a community can be a part of change.
Absolutely. The entire premise of the campaign is to give the power of home ownership back to the people that can ultimately exercise that power at the local level. So really looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, let's start with giving us a brief history of where you came from and how you got to the position you're in now.
Oh, great. Well, it is the most boring part of this podcast. I'll assure you that. I grew up in a little town out in western Kansas, population 1,800. I tell people I grew up in the Kansas version of Mayberry. My barber's name was Stan, though. That's about the only difference instead of Floyd. So Plainville, Kansas. Went to K-State, graduated in 2007, was intent on being a small town attorney. That was kind of my way back home. I'm the son of a shade tree mechanic and a stay-at-home mom, the oldest of 6 kids. So me going to college in the big city of Manhattan, Kansas was a big deal. And so I thought, well, we'll just tack on a law degree to this, and we'll keep on moving down the road. Well, I never got bit by a political bug, but I feel like the political bug was after me. And I did an internship during college, like a lot of kids trying to build up a resume, and an opportunity came up in D.C. And so I landed on the staff of a United States congressman, was with him for 3 years. Then he won a Senate seat. And so I migrated over to the United States Senate, spent 9 years there. So I thought my 1-year turn in Washington, D.C., turned into 12. It also turned into a wife, and 2 of our oldest children were born there, in this career with an intense focus on housing. But we decided when my daughter was 3 and my son was about 1 that maybe the suburbs of Washington, D.C. wasn't where we wanted to raise our family. So we're like, where is the best place in the entire country to raise a family? And here I am. We're in Kansas City.
All right.
And so an opportunity came up with the Home Builders Association. I had been the subcommittee staff director for the housing subcommittee for the United States Senate Banking Committee. And so housing is something I've always believed in and appreciated and loved. And now I get to work with all of the builders and financial folks like yourself, all of the tradespeople, and how all of this beautiful mess comes together to create the American dream coming true.
It's a really unique position that you're in, too, because of what you just said. You get, you have extensions to everyone in the industry, and an opportunity to really bridge the gap, I think, more than a lot of any other opportunities out there.
Yeah, it is such a beautiful chaos in the home building space because depending on where you start in your housing production process, whether you start at a piece of raw ground or you start with a lot already done, there's about 100 different skill sets that are required to bring a new home to market. And the absence of any one of those skill sets means that unit of housing doesn't happen. So it really is really cool to see how all of those things work together to create something that I think society has taken for granted in large part that there's always housing available, or, when I'm ready to move, there's going to be something perfect for me to buy, or when I'm ready to sell, there's going to be a pile of buyers that are going to be well qualified and competing for the opportunity to own the place that I previously owned. And now we know that that's not true. So, as we work through some of those market dynamics that create those circumstances, being in the position that I am, that allows me to play a very small organizational role in putting really smart people together to make really cool things happen for home buyers, home sellers, and the economy at large is a real honor and a privilege.
Awesome.
It's amazing. So speaking of, tell us, about Kansas City right now. Tell us about what are some of our challenges, the stats. There's been a lot happening here. It feels like we're a rapidly growing city I don't even recognize anymore.
Kansas City is the place that people want to be. I mean, Kansas City in the decade between 2010 and 2020 grew by more than 9%. The state of Kansas grew by 2.6%. State of Missouri grew by 2.8%. This is a huge draw for a multi-state region. Kansas City has the jobs, it has the healthcare, the entertainment. It's got the biggest pop star on the planet as a part-time resident here. It's just one of those things where we've got all this great stuff going for us. Not to mention 360 degrees of economic development opportunity that we've seen. The Panasonic plant, the new airport, and the logistics parks around that. Millions of feet of industrial space. We've got multimodal transportation available to us. We can still put trucks on the road, planes in the air, barges on the river. It's just an incredible place to centrally locate. And so when those, from a logistics standpoint, say you've got a shipping entity in Los Angeles, and you got to serve the East Coast, you go to the East Coast, but then you become a nationwide shipping company. You got a hub on the West Coast, a hub on the East Coast. Well, you need a hub in the center part of the world, and here we are. And so we've got job growth not only in the white collar and the financial services and all of those service industries, but also in blue collar and manufacturing. I mean, Marvin Windows just opened up a 600 job window manufacturing plant in KCK. And you got the Panasonic plant, obviously, in DeSoto. And so we're just seeing lots of very diverse job creation, which creates, tremendous demand on the housing space to generate diverse housing options. So, when you see that tremendous growth and from a population standpoint and an attraction standpoint, are we seeing a corresponding growth in our housing production? Because at the end of the day, new jobs typically come with higher than average wages. So we're not really worried necessarily about the people that are coming here to work, finding a place to be. It's the displacing factor of the people that are here that have not had access to the wage growth trajectory that the incoming migration has had.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for the number of KC homes that are being built annually, what is that number versus the number that should be built to keep up with demand and keep a healthy market?
Yeah, so I mean, you look back at 2005, 2006, in the early aughts there, we were 12,000 new permit home, per year metro. It was incredibly active, lots of land, lots of growth, lots of opportunity. Fast forward to today, ours was an industry that never truly recovered from the Great Recession, the home building industry. When the rest of the country, recovered to about 72% of its pre-recession permitting activity, Kansas City recovered to 51%. We're just building half as many things as we were 15 years ago. And that's a consequence of a lot of things. But what that does is it creates tremendous pressure on the housing that already exists, as well as our ability to continue to grow at the trajectory that the community itself is trying to grow. And so when we're looking at, you can't build a house without somewhere to build it on, right? You got to have the lot first. We're at a 20-year low in lot production. In 2006, there were more than 30,000 residential lots in various stages of production that were going to be delivered within 18 months. And today, we're just over 10,000. So when you start thinking about, well, we need more housing, we need more land to build houses on. Otherwise, we've got to do something completely different with regard to how we're developing in our communities, whether it's redevelopment, rehabilitation, all of those things. It's just it's a modern housing economy that's going to require a modern solution.
Well, and you have a unique challenge because you're covering essentially two separate states. So you have Kansas and Missouri, and I hear frequently from builders, well, I won't build in Missouri because of XYZ, or I won't do this because of XYZ. So not only do you have a land shortage, you have separate, complete municipalities, laws, permits, requirements. So how do you navigate that effectively?
A lot of that gets navigated for me just because I don't have any say over any of that. So it's, people do business where they're going to do business. But, it does create, challenges as well as opportunities. Within the National Association of Home Builders, of which we're an affiliated local entity, one of about 700 that exist in the country, we're one of the largest, if not the largest, that crosses a state line. So we're very unique. So in NAHB organizational parlance, it's the 50 states and Kansas City. So we're like our own thing,
Yeah.
which kind of
Interesting.
is consistent with our experience in Kansas City, right?
Yeah.
Is we can watch the national news or read the national headlines on CNBC or in the Wall Street Journal, and that's interesting information with regard to housing, but it's not actionable here because it's not the actual experience.
Right.
We're a unique market. We've got unique dynamics, and so it's just kind of fitting that our organization also is unique because
Right.
Kansas City is its own thing. So, if we were building between 4,500 and 5,000 new houses a year, which is kind of what our current trajectory is coming out of the pandemic, and you're looking at relative household formation in the Kansas City metro, ours is a metro that typically does between 7,500 and 8,500 new households that are formed every year. And the general rule of thumb is that you have a unit of household per household, a unit of housing per household formation in order to maintain a healthy market. Mm-hmm. So obviously that incorporates apartments as well. But if you're underbuilding on the single family or the owner occupied side, then you're perhaps turning people into renters that would otherwise be buyers if they had the opportunity to be in that type of housing product. So our chronic underbuilding as a metro is one of the contributors to kind of some of these housing affordability pressures that so many people are facing today.
And do you think underbuilding is just simply because of lack of land, or also lack of just thinking about building from a different perspective? How can we be more creative? How can we do things differently and create more affordability, or smaller houses, if you will? ADUs, I've just heard so many different things lately about communities initiating different types of opportunities.
Yeah, there is. And I say this in front of every group I'm in front of, every elected official, everything, is that there is a tremendous amount of pent-up innovation that
Right.
exists within the home building industry. It's whether or not it's got a path to be unleashed and be allowed to come to market. Because at the end of the day, if someone were to think, oh, the home builder, they make the market, they decide what the prices are, they decide what it is, they're participants in a market that is largely created for them. And that's kind of defined by what we refer to as the 5 L's of housing supply. It's land, you got to have somewhere to build it. Labor, someone's got to build it. The machines aren't climbing ladders yet, so it takes a group of people to go
Right.
out there and make it happen. Lumber, which is a euphemism for all of the materials that go into the home. And then there's lending. What are the credit conditions that exist on both the consumer side as well as the construction loan and builder and development side? And then there's the laws. What's allowed to be built, where, and to what degree? So the confluence of all of those 5 things largely determine what can come to market. So if you've got credit constraints or high interest rates, that's pulling that circle out of the middle and shrinking the market that is allowed to, housing is allowed to operate in. And the same as lumber. We're 400,000 skilled workers short in this country of what we would need just to keep up with current demographic housing demand. You just can't make 400,000 skilled tradespeople show up overnight. So it's a longer process. So when we look at why we're chronically underbuilt or why we're consistently underbuilding, is that there's so many market dynamics that are just basically telling all of this capital, saying, we recognize there's a need, but there isn't enough to go around. So we're going to give you as much as we can, do your best. And we know we're going to fall short from the supply side, even though the demand is clearly there.
The comment of pent-up innovation is interesting because, construction feels sort of like forgive me, everyone, a good old boy sort of industry, right? So, how many young people do we see coming into this industry with new, fresh ideas? Usually their parents were builders, which is great, and that's okay. But to your point, there is a lot of innovation and a lot of big ideas, and it's everyone is almost begging for that, but there just seems to be constant obstacles and hurdles, and it's defeating. So how do we, on a local level, be a part of, opening doors for that and being a part of that innovation and just even providing space for people to be heard?
Yeah. So when we talk about that innovation and those new ideas, perspectives, techniques, materials, all of those things that could be brought to bear when it comes to housing, that market moves so much faster than the public policy market that governs what's allowed. The economy moves faster than the public policy market about it's allowed. So, we're basically dragging public policy behind us. It's more of an anchor than a propellant when it comes to being able to get alternative housing solutions actually delivered to the market, which is the reason that HBAs like ours even exist, is to have those conversations saying, guys, we've got to modernize, housing, maybe not modern purely from an architecture standpoint, but modernize the way that people consume housing, modernize housing to the way that families are being formed right now, which are different than they've historically been. And people are buying houses at different points in their life than they otherwise would have, or seeking out different geographic things. And so the public policy, however, if it's got, rigid zoning, or you've got overly stringent requirements that may have made sense in the 1980s but make very little to zero sense today, we've got to get those barriers out of the way so that this capital can be deployed into those other parts.
I think that's a great segue into your Let Them Build initiative. It's really kind of about cutting the red tape, because like in Field of Dreams,
Jarod,
I love the tech of this.
Yes.
But it's true. If you build it, they will come. But we've got to be able to build it, and we've got to make it affordable. And so there's so much red tape, and I think that's the cusp of what you're trying to do with the Let Them Build initiative. So let's talk a little bit about what that is and how people can be involved.
Yeah, so the Let Builders Build campaign was not something that we just kind of concocted out of thin air. Like, we feel like doing something big and super expensive just to go out and make a splash. Everything we do has a point, right? We serve a bunch of business people. They recognize what return on investment is. Even your average home buyer realizes, I'm going to get a return on this, either in the financial aspect of my equity accumulation. Ultimately, I'm going to sell it. I'm going to have to pay cap gains tax, but that's just the way things go. But they also realize, I'm going to live here and my family's going to come here and we're going to have holidays. So there's a return there. So when we concocted and thought of this Let Builders Build campaign, it was the result of some pretty extensive and rigorous market research. We brought in a number of policy and polling firms to come in and really measure what it is that people in Kansas City, voters, people coming into Kansas City, what do they want to have as a housing experience? What do they think of things? And honestly, we were quite shocked that we got the results that we did. We brought in some focus groups to actually talk face to face with some people to try to test some of this stuff out, saying surely they can't draw this conclusion this clearly. And the focus groups doubled down on what our political research was. And what it showed was there is a high level of trust amongst the public for our home building industry. They recognize these guys build the housing. They're the experts. We need to listen to the experts, get them to the table. Right. They want to build. Let's let them build. Right. They said that out loud. So we're like, wait a minute, there's something there. And so we started testing some messaging and having more conversations. And again, it just bore this out that people have a low degree of trust with housing policymakers, but a high degree of trust of housing providers. Well, we can't do anything as housing providers to provide more housing if the policymakers aren't on board. Right. So the Let Builders Build campaign is to incentivize the broader public to use their voice to say, I have the power to change or improve my housing circumstances, and it just means paying attention. And it means sending an email or participating in the local political process. Now, campaign contributions and all that kind of stuff, that's distasteful for a lot of people. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that if you've got between 13 and 25% voter turnout in local elections, your policy is going to be reflective of the priorities of that minority of the population. So if we have more people participating at the local process saying, you know what, my son is graduating with a law degree from Mizzou, or my daughter's graduating with a medical degree from KU, and they are not going to be able to buy a house down the street or even within proximity of me. Maybe they're a Johnson County or a Cass County native, and they know they're not going to be able to buy a house. I need to do what I can to help better the housing circumstances of the next generation. And you can do that by voting at the local level, because Kansas and Missouri are two of only 6 states in the United States that have no statewide residential construction standards. All of our housing policy in our metro is done at City Hall. So regardless of who's in the White House, regardless of who's in Congress, even the governors are less impactful in our metro. So from a voting standpoint, your vote, your voice has more per capita capacity to make change, because you're just trying to convince the people of your community to allow housing to be built in it. So Let Builders Build is an empowerment tool to say, if you don't like the way that your housing circumstances are, or you know they can be better, join the movement. Get over to letbuildersbuildkc.com and help us amplify this message, because we're simply saying what the public told us they wanted to hear,
right,
and what they expect. And so, I mean, we've got a pretty big platform as a home builders association and good relationships across the metro, but we weren't really looking to be that, I guess, political movement leader. We just want to build houses, and we want people to make money, and we want to provide great housing for people. But the results said, no, you guys have to be the voice. If anybody's going to make any change, it's going to be the members of this industry. So what better entity than the Home Builders Association that represents those entities to consolidate that, organize it, and amplify it?
Yeah.
So for just a normal everyday person that feels really strongly about this, like many other political issues, it's overwhelming. Does one person make a difference? How do we have a voice and share our opinions and thoughts, and how do we help voters get to that table? People don't even know what they're voting for anymore. There's so much information that it's overwhelming. There's so much misinformation. So what would you say to just a normal person, that doesn't understand any of this other than they feel strongly about it?
Of course. So one of the biggest issues that I believe is universally felt when it comes to housing is property taxes, right? We hear it all the time. My property taxes are too high.
Yeah.
All they do is go up. It feels like I'm getting less for this. So communities are responding to that outcry from people that say, we want more services. We want the roads maintained. We want the trash picked up. And yes, they're providing those services. And then they're also providing a lot of other stuff they didn't historically do either. Well, communities have two choices. They can ignore the public and get voted out of office, because only 25% have ever shown up to vote anyway. Or their other choice is, I can either raise taxes on the existing population to satisfy all of these financial demands, or we can create more taxpayers. So we say create more taxpayers. If you create more property that is allowed to be built in your community that's going to be owned by someone else is going to own that, they're going to become property taxpayers. That's an equity stake in your community. It's a stabilizing factor in both society and the economy. And so that's our message is, so you the public, if you've owned your home for 20 years, if you've owned your home for 20 minutes, you've got an equity stake in your community. And if you want more people helping you to foot the bill for all of the services, that's going to moderate your property tax liability in the long run. So why don't you want to go out and add to the quote unquote customer base of the community? It's going to be more people supporting the restaurants and the retail.
Right.
That's going to moderate those prices as well, create less turnover and blight in the community, because there's just more investment going in. So it is a catalyzing effect on a community when more people that occupy a community are owners within that community. So when we talk about, how can someone better distinguish how to be involved in the policy making process surrounding housing is, ask yourself, because, we all live in a place where a candidate or a representative of a candidate has knocked on our door, left something, stuck in right next to the doorknob, and said, "Oh, I'm pro education, I'm pro housing, I'm pro." Well, everybody's pro housing.
What
right?
does that mean to you?
What does that mean exactly? Because someone says, is anyone going to say, no, I'm anti-education. I'm anti. No one's going to come out and say that. But we have very different proprietary definitions door to door as to what that means. So really, this is as simple as saying, I see you're pro housing. What do you mean when you say you're pro housing? What would be a pro housing policy decision that you would make? Because if you put it on your palm card that says you're pro housing, clearly you've thought about that. Articulate to me in this moment what you mean by that. Do you mean more housing? Do you mean less expensive housing? Is this a property tax play? Tell me more about that. Yes, it is all of those things, because clearly we have a lack of housing supply. You can spin it however you want. There's not enough of the product at the prices that people can afford in order to keep the market stable. If you would have pegged the economy at 1980 levels and you look at it, real wages have grown by 17% since 1980, and the cost of construction has grown by nearly 140%.
Yeah, that's not even on the same playing field.
Yeah, those are barely the same numbers. They're just technically still numbers. It's about the only corresponding thing you can decide on those. And so we've got to make sure that we are taking ownership of the things that we can control as individuals, because our city council, one of the things they can't do is negotiate an international trade agreement to get a softwood lumber deal with the nation of Canada, which is where we get most of our framing lumber. They can't unilaterally lower the interest rate. Those are things that we can't control. Those are just part of the economy. What we can control is what's allowed to be built in our communities, how quickly can we build them, and can we build it up enough and serve our own community's housing needs if we just got out of our own way.
Awesome. Well, we have gone way over on this episode, so we are going to come out with a part 2.
Part 2 coming up.
Thank you, Will, so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Well, it was an honor to be with you. Appreciate the opportunity. And for anyone interested, that URL is www.letbuildersbuildkc.com, or you can check us out at kchba.org, a new and revamped website, easier to navigate, lots of information, blogs, and the like. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you.
If you've gotten any value out of this, please like, share, subscribe. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at mortgagemomentum@bell.bank. We'll see you next time on Mortgage Momentum.
Looking forward to being with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for joining us on Mortgage Momentum. If you got value from today's episode, subscribe, share it with a friend, leave a review, or email us feedback at mortgagemomentum@bell.bank.
We always welcome comments, feedback, and suggestions for future shows. Thanks for joining us, and keep your momentum going. Until next time.